Some people believe that fate is just coincidence. Ada Williams was one of them, until she received a phone call that would change her life forever. An unexpected inheritance took her from Boston to Charleston, where a century-old bookstore held more than just old books. Between its yellowed pages, she would discover love letters that would echo into the present, and meet a man whose golden eyes would make her question everything she knew about love. But what happened at their first meeting? No heart was prepared for it. If this story touches your heart, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments, where are you listening to this from? Your support is what keeps this channel alive and bringing stories that touch the soul. Tuesday morning started like every other morning in Ada Williams' life. The alarm went off at 6:15, coffee was ready by 6:40, and by 7 she was already walking through Boston streets toward the school where she'd been teaching literature for 8 years. Nothing in her meticulously organized routine suggested this would be the day her life changed forever. Ada was 32 and had built her existence on solid pillars, a cozy apartment in the North End, a job she loved, and a solitude she had learned to call peace. Her brown hair always pulled back in a modest bun, her green eyes always focused on the books she carried. She was the type of woman who went unnoticed in a crowd, and liked it that way. "Miss Williams, the phone's been ringing for 5 minutes," said Jenny, the school secretary, appearing in the teacher's lounge doorway with a worried expression. "They said it's urgent, and about an inheritance." Ada frowned, pausing mid-sip of her coffee. "Inheritance? Must be a mistake. I don't have any relatives who—" The phone rang again, and this time she answered. "Miss Ada Williams?" The voice on the other end had a heavy southern accent, each word drawn out like slowly poured honey. "This is Dr. Raphael Moore, an attorney in Charleston, South Carolina. I'm calling about an inheritance left by Mrs. Helen Williams." "I'm sorry, but I think there's been a mistake," Ada replied, leaning against the table. "I don't know any Helen Williams. She was your great-aunt, daughter of your paternal grandfather's brother, Charles Williams. She passed away last week and left a property specifically to you." Ada felt the air leave her lungs. Her grandfather Charlie had died when she was 15, and they'd never talked about family in the South. In fact, he always avoided the subject when she asked about relatives. "What kind of property?" she asked, her voice weaker than she intended. "A century-old bookstore in Charleston's historic district, Williams & Co.'s literary haven. According to the will, to claim the inheritance, you need to reside on the property for at least 6 months. Ada almost dropped the phone. A bookstore. Her unknown great-aunt had left her a bookstore. "Dr. Moore, I need time to process this. I have a life here, a job." "I completely understand, Miss Williams, but there's something else I need to tell you." The lawyer's voice became more serious. "Your great-aunt left a letter for you. She knew that someday you'd need a fresh start even if you didn't know it yet." The words hit Ada like a punch to the stomach. How could this unknown woman know something she herself barely admitted? That her orderly, predictable life was starting to feel like a golden cage, that lately she'd been waking up with the feeling that something important was missing. "The property is in perfect condition," Dr. Moore continued. "Helen took care of everything until the end. There's an apartment above the bookstore fully furnished. You'd only need to bring your personal things." Ada walked to the teacher's lounge window, watching students cross the school courtyard. She knew every face, every routine. Her life was safe, predictable, and unsuffocating. "Can I email you photos of the property?" Dr. Moore asked, breaking the silence. "I've also scanned Helen's letter. I think after reading it, your decision will become clearer." "Yes," Ada heard herself saying. "My email is ada.williams.literature@gmail.com. "Perfect. I'll send everything now." "And Miss Williams, your great-aunt was an extraordinary woman. She believed that books have the power to change lives, and that sometimes we need to be brave enough to let that happen." When Ada hung up, her hands were shaking. She returned to her desk and opened her email, where Dr. Moore's messages were already waiting. The photos showed a stunning bookstore. Old brick walls, wooden shelves reaching from floor to ceiling, worn leather armchairs, and tall windows that let Charleston's golden light bathe everything in tangible magic. But it was the scanned letter that changed everything. "My dear Ada, if you're reading this, It means it's time for you to discover who you really are. I know we never met, but I've been watching your life from afar. Through your grandfather Charlie, who spoke of you with such pride, and later through the little research an old curious woman can do. You're a literature teacher, just like I was. You love books in the same desperate way I always did, but I also know you're trapped, dear. Trapped in a life that's safe but isn't yours. This bookstore isn't just a gift, it's a challenge. It's my invitation for you to discover what kind of story your life can become when you stop just reading them and start living them. Charleston will change you. The books in this shop will teach you things that classrooms never could. And who knows, maybe you'll find here the kind of love that only exists in the novels you adore so much. Be brave, Ada. The world needs your story. With love, Aunt Helen. Ada read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face without her realizing it. How could this woman see her so clearly through the pages of a life she didn't even know was being observed? That afternoon, she requested a 6-month leave from school. A week later, she was packing her few precious belongings into a suitcase and buying a one-way ticket to Charleston. As the plane took off from Boston, Ada pressed her face against the window and whispered to the clouds, "Aunt Helen, I hope you know what you're doing." Below, the city that had been her home for 8 years grew smaller and smaller, but something inside Ada's chest was growing, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Charleston's humid heat enveloped Ada like a hug before she even left the airport. It was different from Boston's dry cold. Here the air had weight, loaded with history, and the sweet scent of magnolias she could smell even through the terminal's glass doors. Dr. Raphael Moore was waiting for her in the lobby, exactly as he'd described himself. A middle-aged black man, elegant in his beige linen suit, with kind eyes behind golden glasses. He smiled when he saw her approaching, recognizing her immediately. "Miss Williams, it's a pleasure to finally meet you in person," he said, extending his hand. "How was the flight?" "Long," Ada replied, still processing that she'd actually done this, left her entire life behind because of a letter from a woman she'd never met. And surreal. Charleston has that effect on people, Dr. Moore laughed, taking her suitcase. The city has a way of making you question everything you thought you knew about yourself. Helen always said that. They walked to a navy blue Mercedes parked in the pickup zone. While Dr. Moore stored her luggage, Ada observed the landscape for the first time. Even from the airport, she could see that Charleston was different from anywhere she'd ever been. There was a golden quality to the light, as if the very atmosphere was filtered through centuries of stories. "Helen talked about you a lot in recent years," Dr. Moore said, as they drove through tree-lined streets. "Especially after your grandfather, Charlie, died. She felt guilty for never reaching out." "Why didn't she?" Ada asked, watching the colonial houses pass by her window. Each one seemed to tell a story, with their ornate porches and gardens overflowing with color and life. "Complicated family," he replied vaguely. "Helen and Charlie had a falling out when they were young, something about different life choices. But she never stopped caring about him or about you." They entered the historic district, and Ada felt her heart race. The cobblestone streets were lined with buildings that looked like they'd stepped out of a period film. Antebellum mansions, Georgian houses, secret gardens hidden behind wrought iron gates. It was like traveling through time. "There," Dr. Moore pointed, turning a narrow corner. "Your new home." Ada followed his gaze and her heart stopped. Williams & Cowper's literary haven was even more stunning in person than in the photos. The 3-story building rose majestically between 2 other historic shops, its dark red brick walls partially covered with green ivy that created a natural frame for the large white-trimmed glass windows. A carved wooden sign swayed gently in the breeze, with golden letters that gleamed in the afternoon light. "My God," Ada murmured, getting out of the car as if in a trance. The shop windows displayed a carefully curated collection of antique books and first editions, arranged among small plants and vintage objects that created a welcoming and mysterious atmosphere. Ada could see through the glass the dark wooden shelves that stretched to the high ceiling and leather armchairs strategically positioned near a stone fireplace. "Helen restored everything personally over 40 years, Dr. Moore explained, handing her a bundle of old bronze keys. Every piece of furniture, every book, every detail was chosen with love. Ada took the keys, feeling the weight of responsibility in her hands. They weren't just keys. They were a promise, a commitment to something greater than herself. The main door was solid wood, painted forest green, with a bronze owl-shaped knocker. When Ada opened it, an antique bell chimed softly, announcing her arrival. The smell hit her first: aged paper, leather, a touch of lavender, and something indefinable she could only describe as time. It was the scent of stories that had been read, of dreams that had been dreamed within these walls. "Helen left everything running," Dr. Moore said, turning on the lights. "The bookstore has a loyal clientele. You'll find a list of suppliers, regular customers, and part-time employees that Helen trained personally." Ada walked slowly through the sections, her fingers sliding along the book spines. There was an organization that went beyond alphabetical. The books seemed to be grouped by emotional affinity. Classic novels conversed with modern poetry. Artist biographies shared space with philosophy books. Regional literature blended harmoniously with international works. "She left something special for you," Dr. Moore said, guiding her to a mahogany desk near the main window. On it sat a red leather-bound book with a golden ribbon marking a page. Ada opened it carefully. It was a first edition of Jane Eyre, and on the marked page, a handwritten note from Helen. "I am my own mistress," she said to herself. "It is a little kingdom, I do not doubt, but I never wished for a larger one. Start here, dear." Charlotte Brontë knew that sometimes we need to lose ourselves to find ourselves. "The apartment is on the second floor, Doctor," Moore said gently, noticing that Ada needed a moment with her emotions. "And there's a garden in the back that Helen loved. She said it was where the best ideas grew." They climbed a wooden staircase that creaked musically under their feet. The apartment was cozy and bright, with tall windows overlooking the garden and Charleston's rooftops. Antique but comfortable furniture filled the rooms, and there were books on every available surface, as if Helen couldn't resist spreading stories throughout every corner of her life. "The bills are up to date. There's a small financial reserve for the first few months, and the customers know you're coming," Dr. Moore explained, handing her a folder of documents. Helen prepared everything for a smooth transition. When he left, Ada was alone for the first time in her new life. She went down to the bookstore and walked to the main window, watching the street where her new life was beginning. A man walked by with a golden retriever, greeting her with a friendly wave through the glass. An elderly woman stopped to admire the books in the window, smiling nostalgically. A young couple passed hand in hand, whispering something that made her laugh. Ada realized she was smiling too, for the first time in months. She pulled one of the leather armchairs near the window, picked up the copy of Jane Eyre, and opened it to the first page. As Charleston's golden light filtered through the antique glass, illuminating words she'd read hundreds of times before, Ada felt that this time would be different. This time she wasn't just reading about a brave woman finding her way in the world. This time, she was living it. Ida's third day in Charleston began with her trying to reorganize a precariously high stack of boxes she'd found in the back storage room. Helen had apparently saved decades of acquisitions, and Ada was determined to catalog everything properly before officially reopening the bookstore. She'd woken before dawn, still adjusting to the different sounds of the southern city, the singing of birds that didn't exist in Boston, the distant sound of horse hooves pulling tourist carriages, the gentle murmur of neighbors' voices chatting on their porches. "Careful, careful," she murmured to herself, balancing a particularly heavy box labeled Romantic Poetry, 18th and 19th Centuries. Her hair was loose for the first time since arriving, falling in brown waves over her shoulders as she stretched to reach a high shelf. It was exactly at that moment that disaster struck. The stack of boxes swayed dangerously, and Ada, trying to prevent them from falling, lost her balance. The boxes crashed down in a cacophony of tearing cardboard and scattering books, and she went with them, expecting to hit the hard wooden floor. Instead, she found herself in the strongest arms she'd ever felt. "Whoa there," said a deep voice, with the most seductive southern accent she'd ever heard. "I got you." Ada looked up, and the world stopped. The man holding her had golden eyes like honey warmed in the sun, dark brown hair slightly tousled, as if he'd run his fingers through it, and a strong jaw covered by a well-trimmed beard. He was tall, probably about 6 inches taller than her, and there was something in his posture that suggested controlled strength, like an athlete who knew exactly what his body was capable of. But it was the eyes that captured her. Golden, intense, and right now, concerned about her. "Are you okay?" he asked, and Ada realized she was still in his arms, her hands instinctively gripping the fabric of his light blue linen shirt. Yes, thank you," she managed to say, though her voice came out huskier than intended. He helped her steady herself, but his hands remained on her arms for a moment longer than necessary. "Sorry for barging in like this," he said, running one hand through his hair, exactly the gesture Ada had imagined. "I heard the noise and the back door was open. I'm Alexander Sullivan, but you can call me Alex. I have the antique shop next door." Of course he did. Ada looked at him again, now noticing the details that confirmed her first impression. The obviously expensive shirt, the elegant vintage watch, hands that showed he worked with precious things but weren't too delicate for physical work. "Ada Williams," she replied, extending her hand. When he took it, an electric current shot up her arm. From his eyes, she knew he'd felt it too. "The new owner," Alex said, smiling in a way that made Ada's stomach do a somersault. "Helen talked about you. Said that sooner or later you'd show up around here." "She talked about me?" Ada asked, surprised. They crouched together to collect the scattered books, and she tried to ignore how their fingers touched every time they reached for the same book. "Helen knew everyone on the block, but she mentioned you differently." Alex picked up a copy of Pride and Prejudice and examined it carefully before handing it to her. "She said you had the heart of a romance heroine, but were living like a secondary character." Ada felt her cheeks warm. She really said that? Helen had a very direct way of talking about people. Alex laughed, and the sound made something strange happen in Ada's chest. But she was never wrong. They continued collecting the books in a silence that wasn't uncomfortable, but charged with an energy Ada had never experienced. Every time their fingers touched, every time she caught his scent, something masculine and clean with a touch of wood and spices, she felt like she was discovering a new language that her body apparently already knew. "These are beautiful books," Alex commented, delicately leafing through a volume of Byron's poems. Helen had impeccable taste. Some of these are rare first editions. "You know about antique books?" Ada asked, genuinely curious. "My antique shop specializes in 18th and 19th century pieces. Books, furniture, art objects, things that carry history." He looked at her with an intensity that made her feel like a rare treasure he was appraising. "Helen and I were informal business partners. She'd refer clients to me. I'd help her find special editions." "So you two were close?" Something passed through his golden eyes, a quick shadow that Ada couldn't interpret. "Helen was special to my family. A long time ago." Ada wanted to ask more, but something in his expression made her hesitate. Instead, she focused on stacking the books neatly. "Can I help you get these boxes in place?" Alex offered, standing and extending his hand to help her up. "You don't have to." "I want to help," he said simply, and there was something in his voice that made Ada believe he really did. They worked together for the next 20 minutes, moving boxes and organizing books. Ada was hyper-aware of his every movement, of how his muscles contracted when he lifted something heavy, of how careful he was with each book, treating them like the treasures they were. "There," Alex said finally, placing the last box in its spot. They were standing very close to each other, both a little breathless from the effort. "Thank you," Ada said softly. "You saved my morning, and probably my ribs." "Any time," he replied, and there was something in his eyes that suggested he really meant it. They stood there for a moment, simply looking at each other. Ada felt like she was on the edge of a precipice, about to jump into something that would change everything. There were questions in his golden eyes, and she suspected her own answers were clearly written on her face. "I should go," Alex said finally, but didn't move. "Of course," Ada agreed, also not moving. "Maybe. If you need anything else or want to get to know the neighborhood," he began. "I'd like that," she replied quickly. Maybe too quickly. The smile he gave her was like the sun rising. "How about coffee tomorrow? I know a place Helen loved." "Sounds perfect." Alex headed for the door but stopped in the doorway and turned back. "Ada?" "Yes?" Welcome to Charleston. I think you'll discover that this city has a way of giving people exactly what they didn't know they were looking for. After he left, Ada stood in the middle of the bookstore, her heart still beating irregularly. She looked at the organized books, at the space he'd helped create order from chaos, and knew with a certainty that scared her a little that Helen was right about Charleston. The city really did have a way of changing people, and Alexander Sullivan, with his golden eyes and smile that made her world tilt on its axis, was exactly the kind of change she'd never imagined she'd be ready to face. But maybe, for the first time in her life, she was. Ada spent the following morning in a state of nervousness she hadn't experienced since adolescence. She'd changed clothes 3 times before settling on a simple navy blue dress and leather sandals, trying to look casual but put together for coffee with Alex. But first, she wanted to explore more of the bookstore. There were entire sections she hadn't examined properly yet, and something about the place made her feel that Helen had left more than just books for her to discover. It was in the regional literature section, tucked away in a cozy corner near the back window, that she found something unexpected. While reorganizing a shelf of books about Charleston's history, her fingers found an irregularity in the wood, a small lever disguised among the decorative carvings. When she pressed it, a secret compartment opened at the base of the shelf. "What?" Ada murmured, kneeling to investigate. Inside the compartment was a cedar wooden box, no bigger than a shoebox, with a small golden lock. Ada searched through the desk drawers until she found a bundle of small keys that Helen had left. The third key fit perfectly. The box contained old photographs, some letters yellowed with time, and a brown leather diary. Ada picked everything up with reverent care and sat in the nearest armchair. The first photograph left her breathless. It was Helen, but a young Helen, who couldn't have been more than 25. She was radiant in a white summer dress, smiling at the camera with a joy so pure it was almost painful to see. But it wasn't Helen that made Ada's heart race. It was the man beside her, tall, dark-haired, with intense eyes and a smile that was devastatingly familiar. Even decades younger, even in black and white, Ada immediately recognized the shape of the eyes, the jawline, the way he held his shoulders. It was impossible, but the man in the photograph looked like Alex. Ada turned the photo over. In delicate handwriting, it read, "Helen and Carlos Sullivan, Charleston Summer 1985. Carlos Sullivan, Alex's father." With slightly trembling hands, Ada opened the first letter. It was dated August 1985. "My dearest Carlos, these have been the best 3 months of my life. When you hold me, I feel like I've finally found my place in the world. I know our situation is complicated, that your family will never approve of our union, but I believe love can overcome any obstacle. Meet me tomorrow in the garden behind the bookstore, in our special place among the rose bushes. I have something important to tell you. Forever yours, Helen." Ada opened another letter, this one from September of the same year, and the tone was completely different. "Carlos, I understand your decision, even though my heart is broken. You're right. There are forces working against us that are bigger than our love. Victor Castell has made it clear he'll destroy both your family and mine if we insist on staying together. But I want you to know that these months with you were real. What we felt was real. And even though we can't be together, I'll carry you in my heart forever. Take care of yourself, my love, and when you have a child someday, tell him about the power of books. Tell him that some stories are eternal, even when they don't have the ending we wished for. Helen." Ada felt tears streaming down her face. Helen and Alex's father had been separated by threats from someone named Victor Castell, the same surname as the man Doctor. Moore had vaguely mentioned as being problematic for Helen in recent years. She opened the diary to the page marked with a red ribbon. October 15th, 1985. "Carlos got married today to Margaret Whitmore. I watched from afar, hidden behind the church trees. He looked handsome, but his eyes were empty. There was no joy there, only resignation. Victor Castell won. He managed to separate us by using the Sullivan family's debts as blackmail. Carlos chose to save the family business instead of fighting for our love. I can't blame him. The pressure was immense, and I know he loves me. But some loves aren't enough against the whole world. I'm leaving Charleston tomorrow. I can't stay here watching him build a life with someone else. But someday I'll return, and when I do, it'll be because I found a way to make our love eternal, even if we can't live it. The following pages told the story of Helen moving to Savannah, working in libraries, studying book restoration, always saving money to buy back the bookstore her family had lost when she was a child. The last entry in the diary was from just 5 years ago. June 20th, 2019. Carlos died today. Cancer. Margaret called me personally to tell me, apparently he asked her to do it. She said he never stopped talking about the 3 summer months that changed his life. His son Alexander is exactly like he was at that age. The same golden eyes, the same gentle heart. He's taking care of the antique shop Carlos built, turned it into something beautiful. I've made a decision. I'm going to bring Ada to Charleston. She needs a new life, and I need our story to have the happy ending that Carlos and I never could have. Maybe love can be inherited. Maybe some souls are destined to meet, even if it takes 2 generations for it to happen. If I'm right about Ada and Alexander, if they fall in love like Carlos and I fell in love, then our story will finally have meaning. The love we couldn't live will become the love they can live. It's my last hope, my last gift to the man I never stopped loving. Ada closed the diary, her heart beating like a drum. Helen had planned everything. She'd brought Ada to Charleston specifically so she would meet Alex. She'd orchestrated a romance across generations. She looked again at the photographs, now seeing the undeniable resemblance between young Helen and herself. The same face shape, the same expressive eyes, even the same way of smiling. And Carlos. God, Carlos was almost identical to Alex. A noise at the front door made her quickly put everything back in the box. She hid it behind some books and went to answer, trying to compose her expression. It was Alex, punctual for coffee, with a smile that now carried the weight of all the history she'd just discovered. "Ready to get to know Charleston?" he asked, offering his arm. "More than you can imagine," Ada replied, taking his arm and feeling the same electricity as always. But now she knew it wasn't just attraction, it was destiny. It was 2 love stories separated by decades, finally having the chance to complete themselves. As they walked through the cobblestone streets, Ada looked at Alex and wondered if he felt it too, if something in his heart recognized the story they were destined to continue, and if Helen was right about the power of books to change lives, maybe she was also right about the power of love to transcend time. The cafe Alex chose was exactly the type of place Ada imagined Helen would love. Small, cozy, with wrought-iron tables on the sidewalk, and the aroma of freshly roasted coffee mixed with the scent of jasmine flowers growing in pots around the entrance. "Helen came here every morning for almost 20 years, Alex said, pulling out a chair for Ada, always ordered an extra strong latte and read for at least an hour before opening the bookstore. Ada sat down, still processing everything she'd discovered that morning. Watching Alex now was like seeing 2 people simultaneously. The attractive man who made her feel things she'd never experienced, and the reflection of a lost love that had shaped Helen's entire life. "Are you okay?" Alex asked, leaning forward with concern. "You seem distant. Just still getting used to all of this," Ada replied, which wasn't a lie. "Charleston, the bookstore, you..." "Me?" he repeated, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Ada felt her cheeks warm. "You appeared out of nowhere yesterday and literally saved my life. And now you're here, being incredibly kind to a complete stranger." "You're not a stranger," Alex said softly. "Helen talked about you so much that I feel like I've known you for years." The waiter brought their coffees, and they drank in comfortable silence for a few moments. Ada watched Alex discreetly, noticing how he held his cup, how his eyes moved to observe people passing on the street, how he occasionally ran his hand through his hair when he was thinking. "Can I ask you something?" Ada finally said. "Anything. Helen and your father, did they know each other well?" Something changed in Alex's expression. Not exactly sadness, but a deep melancholy he tried to hide behind a sip of coffee. "Yes, they knew each other," he replied carefully. "Very well, actually. When I was a kid, Helen was almost like an aunt to me. She was always around, always bringing books, always knew exactly what to say when I was having trouble. And then my father married my mother, and things got complicated." Alex looked at his cup, stirring his coffee absently. My mother never liked their friendship. Said it wasn't appropriate. So Helen stepped back. Ada felt her heart tighten. Margaret had known. Of course she had known. Did you miss her? Every day, Alex admitted, looking at Ada with an intensity that made her forget how to breathe. Especially after my father died. Helen came to the funeral, you know. Stayed in the back, didn't talk to anyone. But she was there. And when she saw me, she just waved, like she was saying everything would be okay. And was it? Alex laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Eventually. Helen started showing up at the antique shop after my mother moved to Atlanta. We never talked about the past, but she helped me transform the business into something my father would be proud of. Ada wanted to tell him about the letters, about Helen and Carlos, about how this whole situation was deeper and more tragic than he imagined. But something made her hesitate. It wasn't her story to tell, at least not yet. What about you? Alex asked, changing the subject. What really brought you to Charleston? Besides the inheritance, I mean. Ada considered the question while watching a tourist carriage pass down the street. I think I was stuck. In Boston, in my life, in myself. Everything was too safe, too predictable. Helen somehow knew that and gave me a chance to start over. And is it working? The fresh start? Ada looked at him, at the golden eyes that were exactly like his father's in the photographs, and felt something move in her chest. Ask me again in a few months. They finished their coffee and walked back down the street, Alex showing her historic landmarks and telling stories about the neighborhood. With each step, Ada felt more attracted not just to his appearance, but to the way he talked about Charleston with so much love, how he knew the names of elderly neighbors, how he greeted every person who passed by. Want to see the antique shop? He asked, when they reached the front of his store. Sullivan & Conda Antiques was as elegant as Alex himself. The window displays showcased carefully chosen pieces, an 18th century pendulum clock, a Victorian writing desk, silver candelabras that gleamed in the afternoon light. My God, Ada murmured when they entered. The interior was like a private museum, each piece positioned to tell a story. Alex, this is incredible. Thank you, he said, and she could hear the genuine pride in his voice. Every piece here has a story. I like to think I don't just sell antiques, but memories. They walked among the pieces, Alex telling the origin of several of them. Ada was fascinated not just by the objects, but by the passion in his voice as he spoke about each one. This one here, he said, stopping in front of a shelf of antique books, was a gift from Helen. She said some stories need to be preserved in special places. Ada approached to examine the books and realized they were all first editions of romantic classics. Jane Eyre, Pride and Prejudice, Dr. Zhivago, and in the middle of them, a small volume of 19th century love poetry. May I? She asked, pointing to the poetry book. Of course. She opened it carefully and found an inscription on the title page. For Carlos, who taught me that some love stories are eternal. H. Ada felt the air leave her lungs. It was a piece of the puzzle Helen had left, more proof of the deep love she and Carlos had shared. Find something interesting, Alex asked, moving so close she could feel his warmth through her back. Just admiring the handwriting, she lied, closing the book quickly. But when she turned, Alex was much closer than she'd realized. So close she could see the small golden flecks in his eyes, so close she could smell his scent, that masculine mixture of wood and spices that made her dizzy. Ada, he said softly, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. Yes? Since yesterday, I can't stop thinking about you. Her heart raced. Alex, I know we just met. I know you came here to start over, not to get complicated with someone, but there's something about you. He raised his hand, as if to touch her face, but stopped halfway. I feel like I already know you, like I was waiting for you to arrive without even knowing it. Ada wanted to say she felt the same thing. Wanted to tell him about the letters, about destiny, about how Helen had planned everything. But instead she just whispered, maybe you were. They stood there, suspended in the moment, the tension between them almost tangible. Ada could see in his eyes the same confusion and attraction she felt, could see that he wanted to kiss her, as much as she wanted to be kissed. But then the door chime rang, announcing a customer's entrance, and the moment shattered. "Sorry," Alex said, running his hand through his hair. "I should—" "Of course," Ada agreed, though part of her wanted to send the customer away. "I need to get back to the bookstore anyway." She headed for the door, but Alex reached her before she left. "Ada, dinner tomorrow. I know a place." "Yes," she replied before he even finished the question. The smile he gave her could have lit up all of Charleston. As she walked back to the bookstore, Ada knew she was in dangerous territory. Not just because she was falling in love with Alex Sullivan, but because she was falling in love with his version of a story that Helen and Carlos never got to finish. And this time, she was determined it would have a happy ending. 3 weeks had passed since Ada arrived in Charleston, and each day with Alex was like discovering a new color she didn't know existed. They had dinner together almost every night, walked through the historic gardens on Sundays, and Alex had developed the habit of showing up at the bookstore with the most creative excuses. He needed a book recommendation for a non-existent client, wanted to check if she'd found a first edition he was sure Helen had, or simply stopped by to see how she was adjusting. That Thursday afternoon, Alex appeared carrying 2 coffee cups and a smile that made Ada's heart skip a beat. "Mandatory break," he declared, placing the coffee on her desk. "You've been here since 6 in the morning organizing these books." "How do you know what time I got here?" Ada asked, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Because I saw the light come on from my window," Alex admitted, and Ada realized he must be watching the bookstore from his apartment. The thought warmed her more than the coffee. "Plus, Charlie mentioned you were here when he passed by with Duke for their morning walk." Charlie was the 82-year-old neighbor who'd become a sort of adopted grandfather to Ada, and Duke was his extremely friendly golden retriever. They passed by the bookstore every morning at exactly 6:15. "Charlie worries too much," Ada said, but she was smiling. "We all worry," Alex replied, and there was something in his voice that made Ada look at him more carefully. They were drinking coffee, and Ada was showing Alex a collection of antique maps she'd found, when he stopped abruptly, holding one of the documents up to the light. "Ada, look at this," he said, his voice suddenly tense. It was a detailed map of Charleston, dated 1943, but it wasn't an ordinary map. There were small markings in red ink, strange symbols, and what appeared to be a code written in the margins. "What do you think it is?" Ada asked, leaning in to examine it better. "I'm not sure, but—" Alex turned the map over and pointed to an almost invisible inscription in the lower corner. "See this? Project Refuge, H.W., Helen Williams." Ada felt a chill. Refuge from what? During World War II, Charleston was an important port. Many European refugee families passed through here. Alex traced some of the red markings with his finger. These symbols, they look like they indicate safe houses, escape routes. "You think Helen was involved in helping refugees? Or her family was?" Alex looked at Ada with growing excitement. "Ada, if these documents are what I think they are, they're historically invaluable. Records of a resistance network that operated in Charleston during the war." They spent the next hour examining more maps and found a hidden folder behind the other documents. Inside were photographs, lists of names, letters in German and French, and more detailed maps. "My God," Ada murmured, looking at a photograph of a very young Helen beside a group of people who clearly weren't American. She couldn't have been more than 16 here. "And look at this," Alex said, pointing to an official letter. "It's from the U.S. State Department, thanking Helen Williams for her extraordinary services during the war effort. Ada, your great-aunt was a hero." Ada was about to respond when she heard the front door chime. She and Alex quickly put away the documents and went to attend to the visitor. A tall, thin man wearing a suit too expensive for Charleston's heat was examining the books in the window display with excessive interest. There was something about him that immediately made Ada uncomfortable. Maybe it was how his small dark eyes seemed to be appraising everything, or how his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Good afternoon," he said, with a smooth voice that didn't match his intimidating appearance. "You must be the new owners." "I'm Ada Williams, the new owner," Ada replied cautiously, "and this is Alex Sullivan, my neighbor." "Ah, a Sullivan," the man said. and Ada noticed that Alex had gone rigid beside her. "I'm Victor Castell. My law office is across town, but I've always been interested in historic antiquities." Victor Castell, the name from Helen's letters, the man who had destroyed her and Carlos's love. "How can I help you, Mr. Castell?" Ada asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Well, I heard that Mrs. Helen may have left some interesting historical documents. I represent some collectors who would be very interested in acquiring them." His small eyes moved around the shop as if searching for something specific, especially anything related to the war period. Ada felt her blood freeze. How could he know about the documents they'd just found? "I don't know what you're talking about," she lied. "Helen only left books." "I'm sure she did," Victor smiled, but there was no humor in the expression. "But if you happen to find any documents, let's say maps or old correspondence, it would be very wise to contact me. Some secrets from the past are better left buried, you know." "Is that a threat?" Alex asked, stepping forward and positioning himself slightly in front of Ada. "Of course not," Victor laughed, but his eyes remained cold. "Just friendly advice. Charleston is a small city. People talk, and some conversations can be problematic for certain respectable families." He headed for the door, but stopped and turned once more. "Oh, and Miss Williams, it would be prudent to remember that some inheritances come with complications. I hope your stay in Charleston is peaceful." After he left, Ada and Alex stood in silence for a long moment. "Do you know that man?" Ada finally asked. "I know his reputation," Alex replied, his jaw tense. "Victor Castell is a powerful lawyer here in Charleston. His family has had money and influence for generations, and he's not known for taking no for an answer. Alex, I think he's the same man who separated Helen and your father." Alex turned to her, surprised. "How do you know about that?" Ada hesitated for a moment, then decided it was time to tell the truth. "I found letters and a diary. Helen and your father loved each other, Alex, deeply. But Victor Castell forced them apart using financial blackmail." Alex's face went through a series of emotions: surprise, anger, sadness, and finally, understanding. "That's why she brought me here, isn't it? She wants us to finish what they couldn't." "I think so." Alex ran his hands through his hair, processing everything. "And now Castell is back and he knows about the documents. What do we do?" Alex looked at her with a determination that made her heart race. "We protect what Helen left for you, and we find out exactly what those documents contain that makes Victor Castell so nervous. This could be dangerous." "Probably," Alex agreed, taking her hands in his. "But I won't let him destroy another Williams family love story. Not this time." As Ada looked into his golden eyes, she saw the same fierce determination that must have been in Carlos's eyes 40 years ago. But this time would be different. This time, they would fight together. The 3 days following Victor Castell's visit were tense and full of discoveries. Ada and Alex had decided to meticulously examine all the documents Helen had hidden, working together until late hours in the bookstore, with curtains drawn and only the soft light of antique lamps illuminating their work. What they found was even more extraordinary than they had imagined. "Ada, you need to see this," Alex said on Sunday night, his voice loaded with excitement and disbelief. He was sitting on the floor, surrounded by piles of chronologically organized documents, his hair disheveled from running his hands through it so much. Ada approached, carrying 2 cups of tea. They had developed a comfortable routine over the past few days. She prepared tea and sandwiches. He organized documents with the meticulous precision he applied to his antique shop. "What did you find?" "This is a list of all the families Helen's network helped escape from Europe between 1942 and 1945, Alex explained, pointing to a handwritten notebook. "It's more than 200 people, Ada. 200 lives she helped save." Ada sat beside him on the floor, their legs touching naturally. Over the past few days, they had gravitated toward each other without even realizing it. A casual touch on the shoulder, hands that met when reaching for the same document, moments when one would look and find the other already watching. "And here," Alex continued, turning the page, "are the financial records. Helen used her own family inheritance to finance the operation. She was essentially laundering money for the resistance." That's why Victor Castell is interested, Ada realized. If this information becomes public, several prominent Charleston families would discover their fortunes were built with Nazi money, Alex finished, including apparently the Castell family. Ada picked up another document, a letter dated 1944, written in German. Can you translate this? Alex examined the letter, his knowledge of German limited but sufficient to understand the essentials. It's from a Jewish family thanking Helen for helping them reach Charleston safely. They mention that they paid a protection fee to Victor Castell Sr. to ensure safe passage through the city. So Castell Sr. was charging the very people who were fleeing the Nazis. Worse than that, Alex said grimly. It looks like he was charging both sides, the families fleeing and the Nazis pursuing them. They worked in silence for another hour, the magnitude of the discovery weighing on them. Helen hadn't just preserved an important history, she had preserved evidence of war crimes that could destroy one of Charleston's most powerful families. It was then that the first rumble of thunder made them look up. It's starting to rain, Ada observed, noticing the sound of water beginning to hit the windows. It's not just rain, Alex said, looking out the window. It's a real storm. The power might go out. As if his words had invoked the event, a flash of lightning illuminated the bookstore, followed by deafening thunder, and all the lights went out. Perfect, Ada murmured in the darkness. She heard Alex moving, and then the soft light of a flashlight illuminated the space. Helen always kept flashlights and candles around the shop, he explained. Summer storms are common here. They lit several candles, creating an intimate golden atmosphere in the bookstore. The sound of heavy rain on the roof and wind swaying the trees outside made the interior seem even more cozy and protected. I think you'll have to spend the night here, Ada said, trying to sound casual. It's not safe to drive in this storm. Are you sure? Alex asked, but there was something in his eyes that suggested he hoped she would say yes. I'm sure. They carefully put away all the documents and went upstairs to the apartment. Ada made coffee while Alex fed the fireplace, something she had never learned to do alone. Ada, Alex said softly when they sat on the couch, the flames dancing and casting warm shadows on the walls. I need to tell you something. What? She asked, turning to face him completely. These past few days, working with you, discovering all this together. He stopped, running his hand through his hair. I've never felt like this before, like I'm exactly where I should be. Ada felt her heart race. Alex, I know it's crazy. We've only known each other for 3 weeks, but I feel like I've been waiting for you my whole life. He moved closer, his hands finding her face. And it's not just because of the connection between Helen and my father. It's you, Ada. It's the way you hold a book like it's a treasure. It's how you talk about literature with so much love. It's how you're brave enough to leave everything behind and start over in a new city. Alex, she whispered, placing her hands over his. I'm falling in love with you, he said simply. Actually, I think I already have. Ada felt tears in her eyes. Me too. The kiss, when it finally happened, was like the universe finally aligning. Gentle at first, then more intense, full of all the tension and desire that had built between them over the past weeks. When they separated, both were breathless. Are you sure? Alex asked, his voice hoarse. In response, Ada pulled him into another kiss, pouring into it all the love that had grown in her heart. When she pulled away, she whispered against his lips, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. They made love slowly, with all the tenderness and passion of two souls who had finally found each other. In the warmth of the fireplace, with the storm raging outside and candles creating a golden sanctuary around them, Ada finally understood what Helen had tried to give her. It wasn't just a new life, it was the life she was destined to live. Later, as Ada rested in Alex's arms, listening to his heart beat beneath her ear, she thought about Helen and Carlos. She thought about the love they had been forced to sacrifice, and how that sacrifice had created the path for her and Alex to find each other. Alex? She whispered in the darkness. We're not going to let Victor Castell win this time. She felt Alex tighten his arms around her. No way. Not when we have so much to fight for. Outside, the storm continued, but inside the bookstore, protected by the love Helen had planted and they had cultivated, Ada and Alex knew they were strong enough to face whatever came. Together. The morning after the storm dawned crystal clear and golden, as if Charleston had been washed and polished during the night. Ada woke up in Alex's arms, the morning sun filtering through the curtains and creating dancing patterns of light on the ceiling. For the first time in years, she felt completely at peace. "Good morning, beautiful," Alex murmured against her hair, his voice still husky with sleep. "Good morning," she replied, turning to face him. Even disheveled and unshaven, he was devastatingly handsome. But it was more than that. There was a tranquility in his eyes that hadn't been there before, as if he too had found something he'd been searching for without knowing it. They had breakfast together in the small kitchen, sharing the newspaper and talking about plans to better catalogue Helen's documents. There was a natural domesticity between them that surprised Ada, as if they'd been doing this for years, not just one morning. "I need to stop by the antique shop," Alex said, kissing her forehead, "but I'll be back this afternoon to continue working." "Be careful with Victor Castell," Ada warned, still worried about the man's veiled threats. "Always careful," Alex promised, but there was a determination in his eyes that reassured her. After he left, Ada decided to explore the bookstore more deeply. There was something about the previous night that made her feel like Helen was trying to show her something else, as if the war documents were just part of a larger story. It was in the back garden that she found it. Helen's garden was a secret oasis hidden behind the bookstore, an intimate space surrounded by ivy-covered brick walls, with rose beds, a small stone bench, and an old fountain in the center. Ada had passed through there several times, but this time something made her pay special attention to the rose bushes. One of them was planted in a strange location, not aligned with the others, as if it had been placed there for a specific reason. Ada knelt beside it and noticed that the soil around it seemed to have been disturbed recently. She went back inside and got a small shovel from Helen's gardening closet. When she began carefully digging around the rosebush, her fingers found something solid just a few inches below the surface. It was a metal box, the size of a shoebox, wrapped in plastic to protect it from moisture. With her heart beating hard, Ada took it inside and placed it on the desk. Inside the box were more photographs, some antique jewelry, and a sealed letter with Ada written in Helen's familiar handwriting. Ada opened the letter with trembling hands. "My dear Ada, if you're reading this, it means you found the courage to dig where Carlos's roses used to grow. Yes, dear, that rose bush was planted in the place where Carlos and I used to meet secretly during our 3 months of love. There are things I didn't tell in the diary, things that were too painful to write even for myself. Carlos didn't leave me just because of financial pressure. Victor Castell discovered our relationship and threatened not only the Sullivan family, but also to expose my participation in the refugee network. At the time, that would have meant prison, not just for me, but for all the families we were still trying to save. Carlos knew this. He sacrificed our love to save innocent lives. It was the most heroic and most painful decision either of us ever had to make. But I want you to know, dear, that every day since then was lived with the hope that someday, somehow, our story would have a happy ending. I brought you to Charleston because I saw in Alexander the same gentle eyes as his father, the same brave heart, and in you I saw the chance to live the love that Carlos and I never could. In the box, you'll find the engagement ring Carlos gave me on the only night we were officially engaged, before we discovered that Castell was watching us. Wear it when Alexander asks for your hand, if he does. It will be my way of being present on your happiest day. And Ada, at the bottom of the box there's a photograph I secretly took of Carlos 3 days before leaving Charleston. Show it to Alexander. It's time he knew how his father really felt about me, about us. You are my redemption, dear. You are proof that true love never dies, it just finds a new way to exist. With all my love and blessings, Helen." Ada found the ring, a delicate emerald surrounded by small diamonds in a vintage setting. It was exactly the type of piece she would have chosen for herself, elegant but not ostentatious. But it was the photograph at the bottom of the box that made her cry. It was Carlos Sullivan at 25, standing in exactly the same spot where she had found the box. He was looking directly at the camera with an expression of love so pure and painful it broke her heart. On the back, Helen had written, "My beloved Carlos, on the day he promised to wait for me forever, September 10, 1985. Ada was still drying her tears when she heard Alex arrive. "Ada, where are you?" he called from the shop. "Up here," she replied, trying to compose her voice. Alex ran up the stairs, as if something in her tone had alarmed him. When he saw her sitting at the table with the box and letter, his eyes widened. "What did you find?" "The truth," Ada said simply. "The truth about Helen and your father." She told him everything. The letter, the real reason they separated, the sacrifice Carlos had made. When she showed him the photograph, Alex was silent for a long time, holding it with reverent care. "He really loved her," Alex said finally, his voice choked. "All these years I thought he had simply chosen money over love, but he was saving lives." And Helen knew that. That's why she never blamed him, why she planned everything to bring us together. Alex knelt beside her chair, taking her hands. "Ada, do you realize what this means? We're not just two people who fell in love. We're the continuation of a love story that began 40 years ago. And this time," Ada said, touching his face gently, "no one's going to separate us." Alex kissed her palm. "Never." They stayed there for a moment, absorbing the weight of the revelation. It wasn't just Ada and Alex falling in love. It was Helen and Carlos finally getting their chance at happiness through the people they loved. "Alex," Ada said softly, "there's something else you need to see." She showed him the ring, telling him about Helen's instructions. Alex examined it with admiration, noting the quality of the piece and the obvious love that had motivated its choice. "She really planned everything, didn't she?" he said, amazed. "Right down to the happy ending." Alex looked at Ada, then at the ring, then back at her. A slow smile spread across his face. "Well," he said, "I guess we shouldn't keep Helen waiting too long, should we?" And for the first time since arriving in Charleston, Ada knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she should be, with exactly who she should be with, living exactly the life she was destined to live. Helen and Carlos's story would finally have its happy ending. 2 weeks had passed since the discovery of Helen's box, and Ada's life had transformed into something she'd never dared to dream. She and Alex had decided to create a cultural center with the historical documents, working with the local museum to properly preserve the history of Helen's refugee network. Victor Castell, confronted with irrefutable evidence of his father's crimes, had quietly backed down, knowing that any action against them would result in his family's public exposure. But Ada wasn't thinking about Victor Castell that Saturday afternoon. She was thinking about how her life had completely changed in 2 months, and how every change had been for the better. "Are you ready?" Alex asked, appearing in the bookstore doorway, wearing a white shirt that highlighted his golden eyes and dark pants that made him look even taller. "For what exactly?" Ada asked, closing the book she was reading. Alex had been mysterious about his plans for the evening, saying only that he wanted to show her something special. "You'll find out," he said, offering his arm. "Trust me." They walked through Charleston's familiar streets, but instead of heading to one of their usual restaurants, Alex guided her up a narrow staircase that led to the rooftop of the oldest office building in the historic district. "Alex, what are we doing here?" Ada asked, but when they reached the top, she completely lost her breath. The rooftop had been transformed into something out of a fairy tale. Hundreds of small golden lights were strung between the beams, creating a ceiling of stars. Red rose petals, the same roses from Helen's garden, were scattered across the floor. A small table was set with candles and her favorite flowers, white lilies, and the view of Charleston stretched before them like a map of twinkling lights. "Alex," she whispered, one hand over her heart. "This is for you," he said simply. "All for you." They dined under the stars, talking and laughing as they always did, but Ada could sense a different energy in Alex. There was a nervousness in him she didn't usually see, an anticipation that made him fidget with his napkin and look at her as if he were memorizing every detail of her face. "Ada," he said when they finished eating, standing and extending his hand. "Will you dance with me?" There was no music, just the distant sounds of the city and the whisper of wind in nearby tree leaves. But when Alex pulled her into his arms and they began moving slowly on the illuminated rooftop, Ada could swear she heard a symphony. "You know what I was thinking?" Alex murmured against her hair. "What?" "That 2 months ago, I was just a man who sold antiques and lived alone above his own shop. And now, he pulled back to look into her eyes. Now I have you, and my life finally makes sense. Alex, let me finish, he said softly, stopping their dance but keeping his hands on her waist. Helen and my father lost their chance to live this story, but they gave us the chance to live it for them and for us. Alex released one of her hands, and Ada felt her heart stop when she saw him kneel right there on the rooftop under the stars, with all of Charleston watching from afar. Ada Williams, he said, his voice steady despite the visible emotion, you appeared in my life like a gift I didn't know I was waiting for. You brought light to places I didn't even know were dark. You taught me that some love stories are bigger than one lifetime, and some people are destined to find each other. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, and when he opened it, Ada saw Helen's ring, the delicate emerald that had been polished until it shone like a star. This ring carries 40 years of unlived love, and I want it to carry the next 40 years of our love lived fully, Alex continued, tears shining in his golden eyes. Ada, will you marry me? Will you finish the story that Helen and Carlos started? Ada looked at the man kneeling before her, at the ring that symbolized both past and future, at the city that stretched below them like a promise of all the adventures yet to come. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. Alex slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, as if Helen knew exactly how it would be, and stood to kiss her. The kiss was full of promises, of joy, of all the happiness that 2 generations had waited to feel. When they separated, both were crying and laughing at the same time. There's one more thing, Alex said, wiping the tears from her face with his thumbs. More? Alex, I can't handle any more surprises today. He laughed and picked up an envelope from the table. Helen left this to be opened when you said yes. With trembling fingers, Ada opened the envelope. Inside was a photo of the 2 of them, taken without their knowledge during one of their walks through the historic neighborhood. They were laughing, looking at each other with obvious love, and on the back, Helen had written, "For my dear children of the heart, you are my greatest masterpiece. Carlos and I will be dancing in heaven on your wedding day." How did she get this photo? Ada asked, amazed. Charlie, Alex said, smiling. Apparently, Helen asked him to follow us and photograph when we looked happiest. She really planned everything, right to the end. Alex pulled her into his arms again, and they danced under the stars, with Helen's ring sparkling on Ada's finger and all of Charleston witnessing the love that had found its way across decades. Alex, Ada said softly, there's one more thing I need to tell you. What? Ada smiled, placing his hand over her belly. I think Helen wasn't the only one planning a surprise. Alex took a moment to understand, then his eyes widened. Ada, are you saying that? I'm pregnant, she confirmed, laughing at the expression of total shock on his face. I found out yesterday. If she thought Alex couldn't get any happier, she was wrong. He lifted her off the ground and spun her around, shouting with joy for all of Charleston to hear. A family, he said when he put her back down. We're going to have a family. And if it's a girl, Ada said, touching his face gently, I want to call her Helena. Perfect, Alex agreed, kissing her once more. Absolutely perfect. As they remained embraced on the rooftop, under the stars and golden lights, with Helen's ring on Ada's finger, and new life growing within her, both knew that some love stories are truly eternal, and theirs was just beginning. 6 months later, on a spring morning when Charleston was dressed in its finest colors, Ada woke on her wedding day with golden sunlight filtering through the antique lace curtains of the room that had been Helen's. Good morning, little Helena, she whispered, caressing her already rounded belly. The pregnancy was progressing perfectly, and the baby seemed to love music, always moving when Ada read aloud to bookstore customers or when Alex played the guitar he discovered in the shop's attic. A gentle knock on the door made her smile. Come in, Charlie. Charlie entered carrying a tray with coffee, toast, and the white magnolias that grew in his garden. At 82, he'd become the grandfather Ada never had, insisting on helping with all the wedding preparations and getting teary-eyed every time they talked about the ceremony. How are you feeling, dear? He asked, placing the tray on the small table by the window. Perfectly happy, Ada replied, and it was true. Over the past months, her life had fallen into place like puzzle pieces, finally finding their spots. The bookstore was thriving. The cultural center was almost ready to open, and she and Alex had found a rhythm of life that was both exciting and deeply peaceful. "Alex is more nervous than a cat in a hen house," Charlie laughed. "Spent the whole morning reorganizing the flowers in the garden and asking if you're sure you want to marry him." Ada laughed, imagining Alex in his nervous state. "He knows he can't see me before the ceremony, right? Told him it was bad luck, but he's pacing around the bookstore like a caged lion." The wedding would be in Helen's garden, exactly where she and Carlos had met secretly 40 years before. It was small and intimate, just their closest friends, some neighbors from the historic district, and Dr. Raphael Moore, who had become a father figure to both of them. Margaret, Alex's mother, had surprised everyone by showing up the week before to meet Ada. The conversation had been delicate at first, but when Margaret saw Helen's ring on Ada's finger and heard the complete story, her own tears began to flow. "Carlos never stopped loving her," Margaret had admitted. "I always knew, but chose to believe that with time he'd learn to love me the same way. Now I see that some loves are once in a lifetime, and you're getting the chance we never had." "Time to get ready," Charlie announced, interrupting Ada's thoughts. "Jenny, Sarah, and Mrs. Patterson are coming to help with the dress." The dress had been another gift from Helen, found carefully preserved in a box in the closet, with a note explaining it had been Helen's great-grandmother's wedding dress, made of French silk and Irish lace. Ada had only needed minor adjustments to accommodate the pregnancy, and the result was perfect. Elegant, vintage, and full of history. 2 hours later, Ada stood at the garden entrance, watching the space that Helen and Alex had transformed into a dream setting. Antique wooden chairs were arranged in a semicircle around an arch covered with white roses and ivy. The altar was set up exactly where Helen's special rosebush grew, and Ada could swear she felt her great-aunt's loving presence like a gentle breeze touching her face. Dr. Moore, who would officiate the ceremony, waved to her from the front. The guests turned when the music began, Alex playing guitar and singing softly the song they'd chosen together, but Ada only had eyes for the groom. Alex looked stunning in his vintage navy blue tuxedo, his hair tamed, but still with that rebellious touch she loved. When his golden eyes met hers, his face lit up with a smile so radiant she felt like the sun had doubled in intensity. Charlie offered his arm to walk her to the altar, and together they walked down the aisle of rose petals. With each step, Ada felt like she wasn't just walking toward her future, but fulfilling a destiny that had been written in the stars decades before she was born. "I'll take good care of her," Alex whispered to Charlie when he placed Ada's hand in his. "I know you will, son," Charlie replied, his eyes bright with unshed tears. The ceremony was perfect in its simplicity. They had written their own vows, words that spoke not just of their love for each other, but of honoring the story that had brought them together. "Ada," Alex said, his voice steady and clear, "you taught me that some people enter our lives not by chance, but by divine design. I promise to love you with the intensity that Helen and Carlos never could express, and with the freedom they never could have. I promise to be your partner in all adventures, your safe harbor in all storms, and the loving father of the children we'll raise together." "Alex," Ada replied, her own voice thick with emotion, "you showed me that courage isn't the absence of fear, but loving despite fear. I promise to be your companion in building a life that honors both our love and the love of those who came before us. I promise that our story will be the happy continuation of theirs." When Dr. Moore declared them husband and wife, the kiss that followed was witnessed not just by the present guests, but by all of Charleston, which had adopted their love story as its own urban legend. The celebration was in the bookstore courtyard, with lights strung between the trees and music that lasted late into the night. But the most moving moment came when Charlie asked for everyone's attention for a special toast. 50 years living in this neighborhood," he said, raising his champagne glass, "and I've never seen two people more destined for each other than Ada and Alex. But it's not just about them. It's proof that some love stories are bigger than one lifetime, and that true love always finds a way." 2 years later, at the same time of year, Ada was sitting in the garden watching Alex push Helena on the swing he'd built under the magnolia tree. The 1-year-old had her mother's green eyes and her father's golden hair, and a smile that lit up any room she entered. "Hiya, Daddy!" Helena shouted, laughing with complete abandon. "Careful," Ada warned, but she was smiling. Alex was a wonderful father, simultaneously protective and adventurous, teaching Helena to love books as much as exploring the world. The bookstore had become a community gathering place, and the cultural center was receiving visitors from across the country interested in Helen's refugee network history. They had transformed her legacy into something that educated and inspired, exactly as she would have wanted. "Do you think she knows?" Ada asked when Alex joined her on the bench, Helena asleep in his arms. "Helen?" Alex kissed the top of their daughter's head. "I'm sure she does. Sometimes when the light hits just right in the bookstore, or when Helena laughs in a way that reminds me of someone I never met, I feel like she's nearby." "And your father?" "Him too." Alex looked at Ada with that smile that still made her heart skip beats. "I think they're together now, watching the family their love created." That night, after putting Helena to bed, Ada and Alex sat on the bookstore rooftop with a cup of tea, watching Charleston fall asleep around them. "Do you have any regrets?" Alex asked, taking her hand and playing with the wedding band that now accompanied Helen's ring. "None," Ada replied without hesitation. "And you?" "Just one," he said, and she looked at him in surprise. "I wish Helen and my father could be here to meet Helena." Ada smiled, squeezing his hand. "Who says they aren't?" They stayed there in comfortable silence, two souls who had found their place in the world through a love story that transcended generations. Williams & Cubber's literary haven had become more than a business. It was a symbol in the community that some stories never really end. They just find new ways to continue. And every time someone passed by the shop and saw Ada and Alex working together, or Helena playing among the shelves, or the plaque honoring Helen Williams and her contribution to Charleston's history, they knew they were witnessing something rare and precious. A love that had conquered time, circumstances, and even death to finally have its happy ending. Helen and Carlos's story had finally been completed through Ada and Alex, proving that some love stories are truly eternal, and that sometimes we just need to be brave enough to let them find us. Sometimes destiny writes stories so perfect they seem like fiction. Ada arrived in Charleston thinking she was just claiming an inheritance, but discovered she was claiming an entire life. Helen knew that true love doesn't die. It transforms, reinvents itself, finds new hearts to inhabit. And when two souls are destined to meet, not even 40 years of separation can prevent it from happening. Maybe each of us has our own Charleston waiting, our own Alex on the other side of a pile of fallen books. The question is, do we have enough courage to abandon our safe life and follow the clues our heart leaves us? If this story touched you, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us, where are you listening to this from? Your support is what allows us to continue bringing stories that touch the soul and show that true love always finds a way.